Trying to build a community for your podcast listeners? Stop! There is one crucial step that you are missing: creating and activating your raving fans. So in this video, you will learn the difference between a raving fan and a community and why you need raving fans first, how to create raving fans for your podcast, and the secret to activating your passive listeners. If you are an expert looking for the best advice on how to grow your podcast audience, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a new video. My name is Deidre Shen, the CEO and co-founder of Capsho, the world's first AI-powered podcast copywriter. I've been working with experts who cumulatively, we have banked over $1.6 million in sales through podcasting. In fact, I did over $200,000 in just my first year podcasting because I stumbled upon these little known secrets. So let's get into how to create raving fans for your podcast. So I have this problem, which is that I have a podcast and I have listeners, but I haven't quite nailed or figured out how to create raving fans for my podcast. So I am thrilled to be joined by Cheung of Pod Inbox, who is going to be speaking to us or teaching us specifically how to create raving fans for our podcast. Okay, so we are back. I've been talking to Cheung from Pod Inbox, and he's going to take us through how it is that we actually create raving fans for our podcast. So Pat, please share with us, what is the first secret to doing this?
Sure. And it kind of plays to your question of what's the difference between a raving fan and community. So when someone's in your community already, so let's say you're a podcaster who runs your own community, whether it's a Circle community or a Discord community, they're already active. So that's why I kind of also mentioned community is almost like step 3 or 4. But the first step is a lot of podcasters have to realize that 90% of their audience is not, they're just passive listeners, right? They're happy just listening to it on a walk, in their car, or washing the dishes or whatever. But as a listener, you're extremely passive. You might not be sharing it with your friends. You might not be doing anything, right? You might not even be going to the podcast website. Like I literally listen to maybe embarrassingly maybe several dozen podcasts on my subscription list. But have I ever done anything for a majority of those podcasts? Probably not. Maybe 2 podcasts I'm actually active. So the first secret is activating that passive listener. How do you get them to take some kind of action where it converts that person into a passive listener, into an active listener? So that's, one of the premises of how we built our fan pages is we got to get them to take actions.
And what actions would you recommend, Pat, that you start that podcast to start with?
Yeah, good question. I would say something that gives them value. So we love kind of 2-way engagement type actions. So social media is good. A lot of people say follow me on Instagram, but that's really kind of a one-sided thing. It's follow me and I'm not going to do anything for you. I don't know how attractive that is, but maybe it is. Maybe you have great content on your Instagram, or I don't know. But if you're an Instagrammer, that's just kind of oh, here's my beautiful, awesome life. I don't know how much value that's actually giving. I'll just kind of continue listening to the podcast. That's probably giving me some value. And I don't know how compelling it is. So we think actions that have some kind of a compelling result. So obviously one of our actions is leaving an audio message. We think that's pretty compelling because if you tease it out with I might answer your question on the show, that's very tangible, right? And especially if they've heard you on other episodes, kind of feature other fan questions and answer it on the show, chances are maybe that's something that's going to compel me to take an action. Or maybe a fan shout out. I think one of the first times I interacted with the show, it was because they were shouting out their fans that donated $5. Right?
Wow.
I was like, yeah, I could. That's pretty cheap, right? Like, I can guarantee a shout out with $5. That's one of these other actions you could take on our Pod Inbox fan pages is you can do a donation or something. So, when we designed our product, we really thought, what are these kind of what we call value for value type actions? Like you're kind of getting some value. You're doing something where you're getting some value back. We think that's the best way to kind of activate, your passive listeners.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. So the first step is to find a way to activate them, which is, it can be a tricky one when you've never thought about it before, right? But I think I really like if you don't know what to do, then just go with what Pat's recommendation is and just request an audio message. Super simple, super easy, and then just have a segment on your podcast where you play that audio message maybe and answer the question, or you just give them a shout out. So super easy to start there. I love that.
Yeah, and start with just I have a podcast too. And you're going to be a guest pretty soon, and one of the questions I always ask is, "What's your call to action?" Like if you don't have one, you kind of know that's something to first think about. What's your primary call to action? Yeah. So we always encourage podcasters to have at least one, maybe even up to 3. So it could be like, leave a message, follow me on Twitter or follow me on Instagram and maybe something else. But at least have one primary one where you could track. So that's super important too, because some people are like, oh, tell a friend about it. I don't know if you could ever track that, right? So some action you could track, be your primary one.
Yeah, but yes, that's right. You would definitely want to be using something that you can track for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so secret number 2.
Secret number 2. So just to back up a little bit, all these 3 secrets, and I could keep on going, is in this kind of umbrella what I call the pirate secrets to growth for podcasters. And I call it pirate is because pirate's favorite word is what?
Arr.
Exactly. ARR and a bunch of R's. I stole that from the startup world. That there's pirate metrics for startups, and there's pirate metrics for podcasters. And the first one was activate. So easy way to remember this is activate starts with an A, and then the rest of the ones are R's. And we could go. I'll pick out 2 other ones, but there's quite a bit number of R's. So the next one I would say is recognize. Recognize your fans, especially the ones who are engaging and active, because those are the ones we call your super fans. Pat Flynn, super prolific podcast teacher, he kind of wrote this book called Super Fans, one of my favorite podcasting books, because it really kind of, he really teaches your super fans are probably your most important fans because they're the ones who's going to sort of donate money to you if you're collecting money. They're the ones who's going to support you, and they're the ones who are going to share your podcast to their friends and family, right? Like we hear every year from, these podcast conferences, like what's sort of, the biggest way podcasts grow. And these sort of marketing firms or market research firms always conclude that still the biggest way podcast grows is through word of mouth, right? And unfortunately, there's no word of mouth button. So, we really think doing this fan service, like what Pat Flynn, teaches in his Super Fans book, is really just, engaging with your fans. So the second most important thing we think when engaging with your fans is recognize them when they do finally engage, because not a lot of them will. From our research, about anywhere from 5 to 9% of your passive listeners will actually convert to taking some kind of action and being engaged and being a super fan. So when they do, it's super important to, recognize them. So let's say in our example, your primary call to action is ask them to leave a message. Well, reply to them, thank them for leaving a message, or maybe your, primary call to action is follow me on social media. Well, follow them back or thank them. especially if they, post a comment, definitely comment back. Not only just for the algorithm, I think a lot of people do it for the algorithm because that's obviously important, right? Like the more kind of a conversation you have in, like, let's say your Instagram feed, the more Instagram's going to kind of boost your post too. But, that's important, obviously. But more importantly, that fan, when they get a reply, it means the world to them because, they're a fan of yours. And if they're taking action, it probably means they're a super fan. And if you kind of encourage that super fan behavior, other fans will see it and they'll kind of want to be a super fan as well.
Awesome. I love that. Okay. So what I want to sort of emphasize here is that recognizing doesn't mean recognizing in a stage way. Recognizing can literally, as Pat said, just be a reply back. Recognize them person to person, thank them for actually engaging with you, thank them for commenting, thank them for emailing, thank them for whatever it is that they're doing. So I really, really like that, because sometimes I think when we think of recognize, we're like, oh my gosh, how do I have enough time to be shouting out this person, all of these people that have engaged with me? So I think that was a really, really great call out.
Yeah. And like you said, it's kind of a one-to-one type of recognition.
Yes.
Because the next one, if you want me to go to the next one, is more. We call it reward. Reward your fan, and that could be on a greater stage. So a reward is it goes beyond the recognition where you're just kind of recognizing that they're active and engaged. You're actually giving them something back, right? And yeah, on our platform, we highly teach reward. And one of the rewards, let's go back to that scenario where you're saying, leave a message, leave a question, and we'll answer it on a podcast. When they leave a question, you reply saying thanks. You might even on Pod Inbox, you could do text or audio replies through the platform. So in the reply, when you recognize them, you could quickly say, thanks, I'm probably going to, share this on an episode. And the reward is actually sharing it on the episode, right? Yes. When you feature them on the episode, they are going to feel highly rewarded. And we love that reward because it's, basically free for you, right? It's like, yes. A podcast is not free because, you might be taking an ad spot, but no one will think of that as an ad spot. So it's practically free. So when you feature, one of my favorite ones is I listened to this podcast called Tiger Belly. I don't know if you know that, that podcast. It's a comedy podcast by Bobby Lee. And he does, I'm forgetting it, but he does something, I think it's called Useless Advice or something like that, where people email. I don't think he's playing audio messages for some reason, but I think he answers audience questions. I think, and he does it in a unique way where he features the question, gives obviously the fan a shout out, and it's usually like a kind of an involved question where he gets his guest, who's usually another comedian, and they both answer the question, which is super fun because if you're a fan, you're not only kind of getting Bobby Lee's advice, you're getting like two people on the show answering your question, which is, I think is brilliant. And that's a reward, right? That's it was like extra content for their show, it's also, usually one of my favorite segments because it's kind of funny how they kind of riff on something that's a little bit ad hoc. Yes. Yeah, so it's kind of a win-win for all, right? Like it costs him nothing. It costs him nothing to do. He gets extra content on the show, and the fan gets super rewarded. And not only that, like it kind of reinforces, and that's kind of another R I won't get into, but like when you do actions like this, it reinforces to other fans that you're engaging, you're listening to them, you're and that you care, right? Yes. All that stuff is super important in building your super fans.
I love that. Wow. Okay. So the 3 secrets to creating raving fans for your podcast. And the easy way to remember this is the pirate R. So start with your A, activate, then we recognize, and then we reward. So cool. Know in the comments what new thing you learned from this video. And if you want to hear the full story behind how Pat Cheung stumbled upon this little known secret, then listen to episode 18 of the Grow My Podcast show. I'm going to leave the link for that below. This video out if you want to know exactly how to make the most out of a live event like Podcast Movement, especially if you're an introvert. And this one, if you want to know how to end a podcast episode with confidence and getting the outcome that you're looking for.